Tonight, we begin with a story shaking NATO capitals, rattling financial markets, and intensifying debate over the future of the war in Ukraine. On Saturday, September 13th, US President Donald J. Trump sent a forceful and unprecedented letter to every NATO member state. More than just a policy memo, it was framed as a global ultimatum. The message was unmistakable: halt the purchase of Russian oil, impose sweeping sanctions, and force an immediate end to the war in Ukraine. The letter, released amid a week of dangerous escalations in Eastern Europe, has thrown the spotlight back onto NATO unity, Russia's aggression, and the role of the United States in shaping the next stage of the conflict. Trump's words were blunt and direct. Donald Trump wrote, "NATO's commitment to win has been far less than 100%, and the purchase of Russian oil by some has been shocking." The criticism landed hard. In one stroke, Trump accused NATO allies of weakness and complicity. His demand was clear: if the alliance wants to stop Moscow, it must first stop fueling it. In the letter, Trump's frustration was palpable. He criticized allies for undermining leverage against Moscow and set conditions for US leadership. He declared, "I am ready to implement major sanctions on Russia, but all NATO nations must first unify in halting Russian oil imports and imposing their own sanctions." It was not a suggestion, it was a demand. Unity before action, embargo before escalation. For Trump, NATO's credibility hinges not just on military deployments or statements of solidarity, but on whether its members are willing to make hard economic sacrifices. To him, buying Russian oil is not just trade, it's betrayal. But the letter didn't stop with oil or Russia. Trump went further, laying out a plan that shifts the battlefield into global trade. He argued that pressure on Moscow must include pressure on Beijing. Trump suggested we should impose 50% to 100% tariffs on China, which holds significant influence over Russia. These tariffs can be lifted once the Ukraine conflict ends. In other words, use China's economic vulnerability as leverage to break Russia's will. According to Trump, Beijing's ties to Moscow make it a decisive player in prolonging the war, and hurting China's economy could force Russia to the table. This approach is bold but also risky. Europe depends heavily on trade with China. Tariffs of that scale could ignite a trade war, destabilize global markets, and divide NATO itself. Still, Trump framed it as a temporary, tactical measure, tariffs imposed not as punishment, but as leverage. At the heart of Trump's letter was an appeal to lives lost. He underscored the staggering toll of the war, making the human cost central to his case. He wrote, "This conflict has claimed 7,118 lives in the past week alone. It is Biden's and Zelensky's war, but I aim to save lives." That framing served multiple purposes. It highlighted urgency. It blamed US President Joe Biden and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for the war's continuation. And it positioned Trump as the leader with the solution. Whether the casualty figure is accurate or not, the message was unmistakable. The war is intolerable, and only decisive action can stop the bloodshed. The backdrop for Trump's intervention is NATO's own heightened military posture. On September 10th, Poland, with NATO support, shot down suspected Russian drones that violated its airspace. This marked the first time since the invasion began that NATO directly intercepted Russian hardware. 2 days later, on September 12th, the alliance launched Operation Eastern Sentry. The mission was designed to fortify defences along NATO's eastern flank. France quickly responded by deploying 3 Rafale fighter jets to Poland, underscoring European resolve. For NATO, these moves signalled seriousness. For Trump, they weren't enough. His letter effectively argued that while jets and missions show strength, real victory comes only from economic chokeholds. Trump concluded his letter with perhaps the most chilling words of all. He warned, "If NATO does as I say, the war will end quickly and all of those lives will be saved. If not, you are just wasting my time and the time, energy, and money of the United States." It was an ultimatum, stark, uncompromising, and unmistakably Trump. The United States, he implied, will not endlessly bankroll NATO's indecision. The time, the energy, the resources of Washington are not unlimited. Either NATO follows his prescription or America's patience runs out. This leaves the alliance with deep dilemmas. Cutting off Russian oil completely remains politically and economically explosive in parts of Europe. Some nations have reduced imports dramatically since 2022, but others remain tied by contracts, pipelines, and domestic political pressures. Trump's demand forces these governments to weigh immediate economic pain against long-term security goals. The China proposal may be even more divisive. European economies are intertwined with Chinese trade. Tariffs of up to 100% would hit not just Beijing, but industries across the continent. NATO may struggle to present a united front if forced to choose between economic health and Trump's geopolitical leverage. At home, Trump's letter is sure to reverberate across the political spectrum. By calling the war Biden's and Zelensky's, he injected a sharp partisan edge into what NATO has tried to frame as a united Western mission. For Trump's supporters, the letter presents him as bold, decisive, and unafraid to challenge allies. For his critics, it will be viewed as reckless, undermining NATO unity, risking escalation with China, and politicizing a war that has already cost thousands of lives. The United States has often been described as NATO's backbone. Trump's warning raises the question, what happens if that backbone threatens to walk away? In the coming days, reactions will pour in. NATO's Secretary General will face questions on whether the alliance will adopt Trump's plan or resist it. European capitals, particularly Berlin and Paris, will be watched closely for signals of support or pushback. Russia is almost certain to exploit any divisions that emerge, framing NATO as fractured and indecisive. China, too, will likely respond sharply to the tariff threat, signaling that economic warfare against Beijing will not come without consequences. Global markets are already nervous. Energy traders are weighing the possibility of further sanctions and embargoes. Even the hint of US tariffs on China has the potential to ripple through supply chains, currency markets, and stock exchanges. Ultimately, Trump's letter is more than just a diplomatic document. It is a test of NATO unity, of transatlantic relations, and of the international order itself. By framing his demands as the only path to peace, Trump has forced allies into a corner. They can follow his lead or risk being painted as complicit in prolonging war. The stakes are enormous. For the people of Ukraine, for NATO soldiers on the front lines, for global economies intertwined with Russian energy and Chinese trade. This moment could shape the trajectory of the conflict for months, even years to come. For now, one thing is certain. The ball is firmly in NATO's court. President Trump has spoken, and the world is waiting for an answer.